Zach from Gravel Bike California, here in Alpine, ready to stay the course, taking on the Great Western Reroute. I've done a number of gravel stoke rides, but GWR is completely other animal, with this edition going far backcountry and almost double the miles of what I'm used to down here. Today, we'll almost reach mile high status, going up into the Cleveland National Forest and the Cuyamaca Wilderness. Dave has been spending a lot of time curating this route, and it's great when you share your passion for exploration with others, like me, who are pining for it. I said alpiner. Never mind. Let's roll. While the town of Alpine has its roots in the late 19th century, the area is the ancestral home to the many tribes of the Kumeyaay. As at 1,800 feet, the current name might not be as ski-friendly as you think, but with the nearly century-old Route 80 passing through town, this area has so much more to explore. The long route was shaped like a candy-laden lollipop, with the bulk of the climbing in the first half, with a diverse potpourri of dirt sectors on the back end. While it was time to you-know-what out of Alpine brewing, we had a pretty orderly rollout to start, aided by a majority of businesses being closed at this hour, as our route headed due east, merging onto Alpine Boulevard in the heart of town that was central to highway traffic and others before, entering soon into the Cleveland National Forest, founded in 1893, then crossing over Interstate 8, where we'd be spending the rest of the ride, and splitting left onto Viejas Grade, enjoying the flatness while we can, with Dave and Jake Orness covering the socials, now entering the Viejas Reservation, home of the Kumeyaay, rolling through these spaced out ranch lands, with the group not fractured yet, taking a note of the water play for the way back, as at mile 6, our first dirt was introduced to us on Viejas Grade, and locking us into our first climb as well, averaging a steady 5.5% for 4 miles, where you had to be prepared for modern travelers, as this was part of the stagecoach route dating back to the 1850s. Getting to chat with Adam, who laid out this course, showing my fault of taping intros early, with the group starting to scatter near the top, having to play a lot of catch-up trying to keep my cameras clean, cresting with still a little dirt ahead, skipping the fountain stop for now, returning back to the lead group, hitting the road for splitting onto Oak Grove Drive, then onto Boulder Creek, where the speeds would get spicy. We had 6 miles of pavement to enjoy, with the first 3/4 trending downhill. And while I do research on surfaces and elevation before every ride, it's hard to get the feel for an area until you're actually out there, feeling like I wasn't able to absorb the context around between the trees. But once the foliage was scaled back, it was absolutely gorgeous. That can be a distraction at these speeds, though this surface was in perfect shape, making conditions for breezing through ideal, as seeing for miles is something you have to see in person. Although I wasn't aware of this water crossing spreading us apart, switching us back into ascension mode, where you had to put in an effort to stay up front. That's hard to do while you're fiddling with production, but a bit easier on the lower half of this climb before we hit the dirt, as the saddle in the distance looked more than 3 miles away, with no letdowns on rotations, changing surfaces, looking to find the right line to avoid the washboard, making it hard for me to capture the strain of the section, with the higher speeds kicking up more dirt not doing any favors, regretting at the time I brought 5 cameras with me, just holding on making it to the top, where we had over 4 miles of downhill ahead. And while I don't think of myself as a master descender, this portion definitely showcased what an advantage of a little front suspension could do. It felt like I made a lot of time back to the front, which was completely washed away after losing a water bottle that was necessary sustenance to make it to the next pit stop. While locating the fellow whose water bottle fell next to mine, which might have been good for my overall health, dropping the urgency to stay with the front group, trying to enjoy the views that were fleeting as we sunk into the valley, as the water crossing at the bottom looked welcoming and should have been labeled as fun, but the slippery surface underneath produced a couple of crashes, with volunteers now warning of the moss beneath, feeling cautious on the short pitch in front of the Boulder Creek Preserve, and then more so with cars passing as we dip back down, with the turnaround starting our biggest effort of the day, climbing over 2,600 feet in 11 miles, as temps felt a lot higher since our last ascent, not having the benefit of shade to counter. And while I'm definitely intrigued to explore this national forest more, maybe a little less so under the brink of summer, as Cedar Creek Road would follow under that category, but glad I followed directions to make the hairpin turn to stay onto Boulder Creek, now getting some inclusion from a number of oak trees, where I wish for longer shadows than in the middle of the day. And the problem with joking so much is when people don't realize you're really asking for help.
Give me sticky marbles in there.
With few clues presenting where we were headed, while still knowing there was a lot of space out there, this 10% pitch was unwelcome, not just for the effort, but how these slower speeds made it a difficult place to troubleshoot.
I'd love to fix the car with my front camera, but I keep getting bit.
After our brief sojourn through the Inaha Reservation brought the end to continuous climbing and some welcome rollers tough to cover with my handheld, but so glad to get a reprieve from dirt kicking up, turning right onto the unstriped Engineers Road that keeps a steady 5% grade for these last 4 miles, with a number of homes aligning for the duration, as the trees shield their appearance and destination, enough that I wrongly trusted my GPS taking me off of Engineers, now at the point where I'd swing across the road to find a little bit of shade, and the carbs fuel handed out to start was the jump that I needed, finally cresting near the 5,000 foot mark, with West Peak looming to the south. Turning onto Highway 79 was a milestone, not just reaching the halfway point, but coming across Lake Cuyamaca meant that we were over 80% done with climbing for the day, and the location of the pit stop with Dave mobile yet again, where I'm fine with having an over selection of fueling options, and Tim from Lost Cyclery busy at keeping me rolling again. Now, with my final 3 cameras set up and no spares, I was glad to be riding on Peter and Matt's coattails for the duration. Glad to be pounding off the miles, heading northeast on Highway 79 with this gorgeous open space to the right as a sign of things to come. As I was not expecting this much grasslands at this elevation, turning off onto the Mason Truck Trail, getting the feeling I'd be surprised in a good way, as the first portion was semi-occluded from the topiary, but it all became more fascinating with the elements scaled back, with the view out east to Anza Borrego, my favorite of the day, though all too short unless you missed your GPS cue. That would be easy to do on the single track, but where there would be a couple of brief negotiations at the start. The scenery was captivating up here. Grateful for its designation as a wilderness area, as the playfulness ranked high too, with no argument to stay on the trail. Thankful the grass wasn't too high, as this 3-mile stretch of dirt felt longer than its actual distance, but still wanting more. Getting our wish granted on the other side of Sunrise Highway, turning onto La Cima for a 1.5 miles that parallels the main road, and overshooting the Pedro Fages Monument, who was later named Lieutenant Governor after searching for deserters on these trails, as we didn't feel like too much to escape from, except for some of these bumpy conditions that maybe our subgroup, Shale Bike California, would enjoy. Impossible to match the high standard from our previous trail. So call me content, we got on the road instead of continuing on La Cima, as the reintroduction to downhill pavement was highly welcomed. Feeling like it was far too long to have the sensation, with Upper Long Valley Road raising our spirits from a riding perspective. But if you figured out from this tracking shot, my front camera went out. Thankful for the smooth surface to do some handheld, knowing this technique would be unsustainable for the remainder. So exchanging my rear camera for the front was my move before hitting dirt. But a much different attitude rolling on this surface, with this super enjoyable 2.5 miles in another uninhabited valley that's thankfully preserved. That while June kicks off our harshest months in Southern California, I can still give a big nod to this area's elegance. But humanly, you couldn't deny today's variables as being one of the hotter days so far this year. Though despite the heat, our recovery times were good, exiting through the complex of Camp Cuyamaca with a little throw-in of single track of the bumpy variety on the way out. Now crossing Highway 74, hard to believe we hadn't passed the half-century mark yet. We had about 3.5 miles of capable single track that stayed close to the highway, first with the appropriately named West Side Trail, then taking a cue from the Sweetwater River impediment, where we were still lucky to have water of our own, and flipping to the other side of the highway that looked to be inviting effort from the start, but fortunately that prospect was short-lived, as getting down was a bit technical to start, though elegantly stripping away the difficulty as we progressed, and throw in the allure of how it opened up at the end, making the East Side Trail the most underrated section of the day. Getting back onto Highway 74 briefly was a nice change of pace, not just for the speed, but to have a little more room around you. Turning off about a mile down for a final new dirt sector. And while this shallow crossing was a kind-hearted greeting, the following half-mile climb was not. With all of us arguing against the numbers, saying the pitch doesn't cross 9%, and hoping for an end to these efforts, as Merrigan Fire Road was kinder after that peak. Although we had hit so many different sections of dirt, it was hard to guess now which direction we were headed. With flat ground, a rarity for this ride, exiting out of Rancho Cayumaca that was granted in 1845, leading to our last baker's dozen miles left, rolling through Descanso with its roots in the late 19th century, having turned onto the eastern end of Viejas Grade for our last real climb of the day, that at a little over a kilometer was the longest for the second half, returning back to the dirt portion of Viejas Grade, where we signaled for a stop, getting water that we passed up the first time through, that even though we got to enjoy Viejas Grade from a gravity perspective now, the look of things at this hour suggested the word dry. Nice to enjoy views of the valley ahead, finishing up our final piece of dirt. Now in get me back mode, despite a few more businesses open up in the afternoon, rolling back into Alpine Brewing in time to catch some giveaways, as well as some sustenance to recharge, and other options, unless you hate pie charts. With hats off to Dave and crew pulling together a memorable Great Western reroute. Another San Diego adventure is in the books, but this was truly mega-sized. I mean, I love exploring new places in California, and even though we're just east of San Diego, it's brought its own flavor to it. I love how the geography is so similar, but different in its own way, and the best way to discover and experience it is clearly by a gravel bike. Hats off to Dave and Adam for designing the course and putting on a great event, and I'll be rerouted back. Anyways, if you want to support us, hit the subscribe button, get me some cough syrup, or go to our shop so we can bring you more from the State of Dirt.